One of my favorite types of videos to make are the ones where I take a game I love, like Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate 3, and talk about them under a context that may not actually have anything to do with that game. The 7 deadly sins, the 7 heavenly virtues, wow, I could have sworn I have done this more than twice. Well, anyway, today I would like to do that once again by talking about a classic literary tool, the hero's journey. The hero's journey isn't some set-in-stone guideline that every story has to follow. It is simply a template made to identify common story tropes and is mostly used nowadays for authors and such to make sure that they haven't missed some important part of their story while they're writing it. Now, most people learn about the hero's journey in school, 11th grade for my school specifically, but in 11th grade, I went to English class 2 times. I skipped a lot of school. And yes, I did graduate. The American education system is kind of a joke. But I do remember during those 2 classes that we started talking about the hero's journey, and I've kind of had it in the back of my mind half learned all this time. So in this video, I'm gonna break down the hero's journey and do so under the context of the true main character of Baldur's Gate 3, the Dark Urge. Playing as the Dark Urge is an optional way to play the game, but I would argue that it is the best way because it gives the player character a greater context within the story of the game. Before we start, I would love it if you liked the video and subscribed. I just realized the other day how embarrassingly awful my ratio of subscribed viewers and unsubscribed viewers is, so please help. And yeah, also for those wondering about high school, I somehow got away with having over 1,000 absent periods between my junior and senior year, and graduated with I think it was a 1.7 GPA. Yeah, I don't really have anything funny to add to that. So let's just get into the video. Now, there are actually 2 widely known versions of the hero's journey, the first being established by Joseph Campbell back in 1949. Personally, I feel like his version is significantly harder to follow in the modern day. Seriously, man, can you, without Googling it, tell me what I can't even fucking say it. Tell me what apotheosis means? Because of that, I will be referencing the more streamlined version penned by Christopher Vogler in his 2007 book, The Writer's Journey: Mythic Structure for Writers. In this book, he lays out an easier to follow 12-stage hero's journey. I will lay out the stages as we go, starting of course with stage 1, the ordinary world. The ordinary world might be a slightly misleading title, because it doesn't particularly mean that the world itself is ordinary or normal or anything like our real world. It just means that the world is how it is, and whether or not the world shines in a positive light, the protagonist is part of this world and they go about their daily life as most others would. Now, this is kind of awkward to say in the very first stage, but Baldur's Gate 3 purposely subverts the ordinary world thing entirely. The Dark Urge obviously did have a life before this. It's not like they just manifested out of thin air on the Nautiloid, though this is a world where things are magically manifested on a regular basis, so I would forgive you for thinking that was the case. No, the story of Baldur's Gate 3 does one of the few things a story can do to completely do the opposite of the ordinary world stage, and instead gives you a character who has amnesia and doesn't know where they are or how they got there. But even with that being the case, I'd like to give a description for the ordinary world in this context, and so even though everything about this situation seems extraordinary, it's actually not unheard of for people to be kidnapped and turned into mind flayers. The game takes place in an established world, in the land of Faerun, and this place has got some messed up stuff going on. Insane monsters, gods battling each other for supremacy, and so in this world, technically, what we are seeing here isn't exactly beyond belief. While the Dark Urge has no sense of the ordinary world in this instance, we, the player, can confidently say that this scenario is technically reasonable. Oh yeah, and I also really messed up the transition to today's sponsor by changing my script a lot, so ignore what I'm about to say. Red flag. You know what else is a red flag? People who don't take their sleep seriously. That's why I am thankful for today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Manta Sleep was kind enough to send me a few things: their Pro Mask and their white noise machine. Both of these things are fantastic for me personally because as someone who has struggled with sleep his whole life, I have learned that there are 2 things that really help: blocking out light in a comfortable and consistent way, and having a little white noise to block out all the sounds that my house makes by just existing. And Thankfully for folks with larger heads like myself, the mask is fully adjustable, and all you gotta do to put it on is just... That's it. Not only does the mask let you sleep in total darkness, but it does so without putting any additional pressure on your eyes, which is important if you're somebody who stares at a screen all day like I do. Myself and Manta Sleep are big supporters of the pro nap movement, and you can be too by clicking the link in the description or using code DumpyKong at checkout for 10% off. Manta Sleep has a wide assortment of sleep aids, so if you are someone like me who really does have a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, then you should check them out. I can almost guarantee you they will have something to help you out. Thank you to Manta Sleep for supporting the channel. Now let's get back to the video. It didn't even snap. It's too comfortable. It doesn't snap like that. Stage 2 in the hero's journey should be one of the easiest to identify in pretty much any story. The call to adventure. The call is pretty damn loud in Baldur's Gate 3. You, as the Dark Urge, gotta get the hell out of here. If you don't, you are almost certainly going to die. That's good enough motivation for me. I'd like to note, though, that you don't always find a story where the call to adventure is so forced. Take example, Luke Skywalker in A New Hope. Luke's life is boring, his world is certainly ordinary, at least for the context of Star Wars, of course, and when he is presented with his call to adventure, he absolutely could have just ignored it. But that is not the case for the Dirge, and so eventually we do get off the Nautiloid by nearly plummeting to our death. But hold on just a second. If the call to adventure was to escape the Nautiloid, then is the journey over? No, of course not. We just started. That adventure is resolved, but there are two pressing matters that need tending to. The first matter is the tadpole. The Dark Urge, and as we find out along the way, some others as well, were infected by a Mind Flayer tadpole. If the tadpole is not removed or killed or somehow otherwise gotten rid of, then we will turn into a Mind Flayer, completely losing our life as we know it, or I guess don't know it at the moment, and our individuality. The second matter is the one unique to the Dark Urge, and that is, of course, the Dark Urge. Dirge is constantly having odd flashbacks of horrific and gruesome memories, but not only memories, they are also afflicted with the terrible desire to want to murder everybody. And that, of course, leads us into our third stage, the refusal of the call. Now, we could try to take this very literally and say that the Dirge is now needing to refuse the urge to kill people, or refuse the influence of the tadpole in their head, but that's not really what refusal of the call means. In the hero's journey, the refusal of the call is about hesitating to accept that earlier call to adventure. Now, what's interesting about the Dark Urge is that they are simultaneously every version of the Dark Urge ever made all at once. And that's because the Dark Urge, while being their own character who obviously has an established backstory of some kind, is also the player. Your Dark Urge and my Dark Urge are both the Dark Urge. And so it is up to us, the players, to heed the call and not be overwhelmed by this sense of impending doom. I'm sure there are a non-zero amount of people who got through the Nautiloid, experienced the Dark Urge a few times, and decided it was all just too much for them. And frankly, I don't blame them. But many people do stay and do heed the call, and that is likely for some due to the fourth stage, meeting with the Mentor. The Mentor, in this instance, could be interpreted a few ways, but I would say, given that we have two current motivations, getting the tadpole out and resisting the Dark Urge, that it would be fair to choose two mentors that are related to each goal. For the tadpole problem, our mentor is pretty obviously our guardian. At the start of Baldur's Gate 3, you aren't just tasked with making your player character, but you also customize someone known only as your guardian. If you're like me, you just make them a tiefling baddie, but regardless of what they look like, they are all the same character. Your guardian, and I'm gonna spoil the story here, so spoiler warning, I guess, but your guardian is actually someone known as the Emperor. The Emperor is a Mind Flayer who has, very luckily, been returned his free will, and now he plans to guide you on your journey to not just rid yourself of the tadpole, but to also defeat the much larger evil behind it all. Of course, his motivations aren't totally selfless, but, you know, that's not incredibly important. Though he may not literally teach you a whole whole lot like we would expect a mentor to, he plays a major role in not only your success in the story, but your very literal survival. The other mentor then, getting back to the Dark Urge storyline, is the ever so odd butler Sceleritis Fell. One night, the Dirge wakes up to a horrible scene, finding that they have just murdered somebody in cold blood. While wrestling with the confusion of that event, on a later night, Sceleritis shows up in our camp and reveals to us that we once knew each other. Not only that, but we were some sort of sick, murder-hungry bastard. Unlike the Emperor, Sceleritis doesn't help us much, but he does teach us things. Most of what we learn about the Dark Urge's past, in the first 2 entire acts really, comes directly from the mouth of this freak. And so, while these 2 mentors are almost opposites of each other, they are both the mentors. The 5th stage is a bit more open-ended, but as we kinda have been, I'm gonna fill it in for both plot lines. That step is crossing the first threshold. The first threshold is pretty tough to identify in either case, but crossing the first threshold is less of an overcoming of the first obstacle and more an accepting of the journey to come, which is very well represented for both plot lines by heading to Moonrise Towers. Yes, we are jumping ahead by quite a lot, but this specific example is the culmination of both stories' first acts. Moonrise Towers may be your best bet to learn more about the figure known only as the Absolute, who we learn may be the one coordinating the whole tadpole situation, and it's also the place where we just might learn a little bit more about our troubled past. But something important to note here is that the hero's journey is not always linear or rigid, like I said at the start of the video. It's kind of flexible, and we need to keep that in mind as we head into our 6th stage, Tests, Allies, and Enemies. This stage represents the vast majority of the game. We face tests immediately at the start of the game. We are granted several allies, as well as put up against many different enemies all within the first act of the game, really, and in the second act, and in the third act. The point of Stage 6 isn't to shoehorn the whole story into this section, but to fill out the epic journey that the story should be trying to tell. Let's take Act 2 for instance. By the time we come into the second act, we should have plenty of allies already. But more importantly, Act 2 fleshes out the real enemies. Act 2 is where we learn so much about what's actually going on in the story. We learn not only about Ketheric Thorm, but also the much greater threat, the Absolute, aka the Netherbrain. But that's mostly in relation to the tadpole plot. Our enemy in the Dark Urge plotline is, well, the Urge itself. We are constantly being confronted with this affliction, and if you're like most sane people, you will do everything you can to resist letting it destroy everything and everyone. Each instance of resisting that urge is also a test, and boy are there plenty of fucking tests in Act 2. Tested my damn patience, that's what they're testing. Now for real though, I think Stage 6 being so open-ended is fun because you can really introduce as many tests, allies, and enemies as you want. Of course, so long as you do your best to actually have them make sense in the context of the story. Back onto the more straightforward path though, our next stage is another one that I think is pretty easy to identify for the Dark Urge, the approach to the Innermost Cave. First though, let's talk about what that actually means. The Innermost Cave isn't meant to be taken too literally, it just means that the protagonist is getting very close to the center of it all. First, as we talked about before, we learn at the beginning of Act 3 that our guardian is actually the Emperor. And you could stretch this Innermost Cave section all the way to learning that the Emperor was originally Balduran, the namesake of Baldur's Gate. Mainly though, learning that our guardian is a mind flayer gives us a much clearer image of why he needs our help, why he's able to help us, and what the next step is. For the Dark Urge path, the Innermost Cave comes when we discover that we are a ball spawn. Most people know what that means by now, but for those who don't, I'll keep it simple. Ball spawn are the children, not metaphorical children, but actual direct descendants of Baal, the god of murder. Not only are we a ball spawn, but we are the ball spawn. Not born of Baal and another parent, but an emissary of pure depravity, literally born from the murder god's own will to end all lives. And that brings us to our 8th and maybe most important stage, the Ordeal. Keeping on track with the ball spawn discovery, the ordeal in this case is pretty simple. After facing off with Orin the Red, the current chosen of Ball, we are faced with a major decision. Do we accept our heritage, our birthright, and become Ball's new puppet for mass murder and destruction, or do we resist him? This choice determines how the game ends, and both are decisions for the player to make, but personally, I believe that the more gratifying choice is to deny your father. If you do so, Ball will use his godly wrath to suck the soul out of you. Pause. And this is actually kind of funny because in Christopher Vogler's interpretation of the hero's journey, he details that the character will likely undergo a sort of death and rebirth. Usually it's metaphorical, but the Dark Urge literally fucking dies. Thankfully though, by passing this test, overcoming our affinity for murder, we are presented with the 9th stage. Wait, that's not the only ordeal on the table, remember? We still gotta face the Netherbrain, one of the greatest threats to the realms, and certainly the ordeal of the Tadpole questline. By either getting help from the Emperor or choosing to free Orpheus, don't worry about him right now, you can do battle with and defeat the Netherbrain. And this is where we get back to that 9th stage, the reward. The reward for our efforts in resisting the Dark Urge is that we now get to live a life free of those awful thoughts and free of Ball's murderous influence. The reward for defeating the Netherbrain is a choice. Would you like to destroy the brain, along with all of the mind flayers and tadpoles it has forced upon the world, or would you like to conquer the brain, usurping and taking all that power into your own hands? But now, after making our decision, whichever it may be, we've gotta adjust to the consequences, aka Stage 10, the road back. The last few stages are a bit less obvious than the rest, but I'm gonna do my best to make some sense of them. The road back in the case of the Dark Urge comes in the form of a question. Can you return to some type of normal life or ordinary world after all you've been through? And if the road back is the question, then stage 11, the resurrection, is the answer. Personally, for the Dirge, I'd like to answer yes. I will continue life and repent for my horrendous past. And I know we moved quickly between these last few stages, but the final stage is the 12th stage, Return with the Elixir. Elixir is, of course, metaphorical. We've had to figure out if we can continue on, stage 10. We ultimately decide that we must, stage 11, and now we return to our ordinary world with the Elixir. In this case, the Elixir is pretty simply our freedom, something we didn't have at the very beginning of the journey, from the Tadpole or from Ball, but something that is a clear improvement over where we have been and what we have done. At the end of the day, we are leaving the Dark Urge and the story of Baldur's Gate 3 better than we found it. And I mean, that does go for an evil ending as well. If the being evil thing is what you want, that's fine. Your elixir in that case would be power or control or comfort in knowing that you are the absolute now. The point is, for the main character at least, something has improved for them. But regardless of which path you lead the Dark Urge down, it's fair to say that old Baldur's Gate 3 did a great job of creating a compelling and fun narrative. And honestly, this breakdown reminded me why video games are my preferred form of media. I can take that journey myself. I can identify stages in the journey myself, and in between them all, it is up to me to control exactly what happens in each stage. And again, while the hero's journey isn't a total Stonewall template, the guide that Christopher Vogler wrote is a really fun way to view the story, or help yourself write one. Actually, in the same book where he outlines the hero's journey, he also gives a total of 8 character archetypes, which just might be something I'll have to talk about someday as well. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to my very, very long overdue 11th grade essay on the hero's journey. Leave a like if you are still here, and please, for the love of all that is holy, subscribe. I cannot look at that ratio anymore without feeling physical pain. And while you're at it, let me know some of the other games that fit well into the hero's journey. I think that Expedition 33 might fit pretty well. Alright, I can't go talking about that now. Thank you all again for watching. GG's, everybody.